Alright, so like I said, 1.2 is honestly not anything that really shows up on the test. But it's kind of a good overview of here's the differences between the economic systems, so that you kind of have a better understanding of how a free market operates and how a free market is different from what we'll call command economies or centrally planned economies, meaning they have a whole lot of government control within them. So, there's 3 economic questions that all societies have to answer. And ultimately, how you answer these determines what kind of economic system you're in. So, what are we going to produce? How are we going to produce it? Who's going to get it? If you answer these 3 questions with consumers and producers, or private citizens, or individuals, you're in some kind of free market or capitalist mode. If you answer these 3 questions with the government, you're in some kind of command or centrally planned economy, i.e. socialism, communism. And so, depending on how these 3 questions are answered. So, we've got command economies, we've got free market economies, and we have mixed economies, which is every economy in the world. There is no pure command economy. There is no pure free market economy. Every economy is some kind of mix. And then a pure command or pure free market is pretty much just in theory how they would operate. But every economy in the world, even ours, has some aspect of both of those. And ultimately, it's a spectrum. If you've got command economies on one end, free markets on the other, every country in the world, every economic system falls somewhere within that spectrum. There used to be a 4th one called traditional economies, but we really don't even talk about it much anymore. It may mention it here somewhere, but pretty much when you had like remote tribes or remote villages, or a long time ago when pretty much civilization was just based on survival, and everything you did was based on survival, and you didn't really trade with other communities. That's what we call a traditional economy. But through globalization and technology, there's very remote places in the world that have internet and cell phones now. There really aren't traditional economies anymore, not that we're really aware of. So they really don't get talked about much anymore. But command or centrally planned economies. This is your communism or your socialism. Government controls all the resources, or mostly all of the resources. They also answer the 3 economic questions. The government decides what is going to be produced, how it is going to be produced, meaning that they're going to decide how to allocate those scarce resources we talked about. They're going to choose which producers get the resources, they're going to choose which products that those producers produce, and ultimately they're going to decide who gets those finished products. And to kind of give a preface before we get into this, obviously with this being a free market course, this kind of feels like it leans towards free markets being better than command economies. We're not really here to state one system's better than the other, even though Micro kind of promotes the fact that we're going to focus on a free market because we live in a free market. So don't feel like this is, all command is bad, all free market is good, because ultimately every system has advantages and disadvantages kind of going into this. So if you're pro-command economies, don't get all up in arms before we get through the entire lecture. But anyways, in theory, why do centrally planned economies face problems of poor quality goods, shortages, and unhappy citizens? There's little incentive to work harder, and central planners have a hard time predicting preferences. Meaning, if the government's going to make all these decisions for society, then it almost has to be a one-size-fits-all program, because there's not enough manpower or time of the day to go around to every single citizen and say, what do you like, what do you like, what do you like, what do you like? It's easier to say, all right, here's what you get. We're going to provide it for you, but you're all going to kind of get the same thing whether you like it or not. So, what is good about communism? What is bad about communism? Good, there's low unemployment, because if the government controls all the resources, then the government's pretty much going to give everyone a job, which is nice, because everyone works. There's great job security, because the government isn't going to go out of business, mainly because it doesn't have any competition. And that's one thing we'll talk a lot about when we get to free markets, is the aspect of competition and what it does. But if there's only one entity that controls all these resources, then there's no competition. Well, no one's going to put them out of business. So that's nice. There's a lot of job security. There's less income inequality, which is a major problem with free markets, because there is no even kill. You know, you have extremely wealthy, you have extremely poor. Obviously, there's a lot in the middle. But if everyone kind of gets the same thing, everyone's more on the same page with each other. Now, yes, you have a few wealthy elite that pretty much make the decisions for everyone else, but everyone's kind of on the same page, which is nice because we don't have the whole income inequality. 1% movement, Occupy Wall Street. If y'all remember those, that's the whole income. The 1%, you know, 1% of Americans control what, like 80 or 90% of the wealth. There's actually a good video. If I can find it, we'll watch it. It's a little animated video, but does a really good job of showing you just like how disproportionate wealth is. It's like, wow, that's great. That's an issue. But anyways, and free healthcare, which is a great thing because they're going to take care of everyone's well-being, hopefully. Bad about companies. No incentive to work hard. Because if you have a job, whether you like your job or not, there's really not room for advancement. You know, you're not going to climb the corporate ladder because it's your job, you're expected to do your job. There's no incentive to innovate or come up with good ideas. Reason being, you don't have access to resources. You can't go start your own business. You can't, you know, introduce some kind of new product because the government's not going to let you. Why? Because the government doesn't want competition. That's the whole point, is that, you know, they're going to control the resources, they're going to provide for society. You know, they don't need everyone trying to compete with them. No competition keeps quality of goods poor. And we're going to look at an example of this when producing cell phones, of how free markets are actually best for consumers, for people buying products. And they're good for producers as well. And then unfortunately, you have examples of corrupt leaders throughout history, because you give a few people supreme power and it usually doesn't go so well. It's really one of those things that, in theory, it's a great plan. It really is, if you look at how it laid out, because everyone's going to be taken care of. When you put it into practicality and you involve humans mess everything up. That's the downside of decentrally planned economies. But in theory, it's actually it's a great idea because everyone's going to get taken care of. It's just we tend to mess everything up. But also few individual freedoms. Once again, more government control, less individual freedom.
I think that China has a question mark next to it.
I got a video on that too. We actually introduced Jacob Clifford today. He went to China and did a video, and it's not awful. He's not like bouncing off the walls in it. I'm kind of looking at the fact that China's really not such of a command economy anymore. There's a lot of free aspects of trade in China right now. We just still assume that China's this big, and China still is a communist country. But there's a lot of free market activity going on. Mm-hmm. The government's kind of opened up and said, all right, let's play with this free market capitalist idea, because you get better growth out of it. A lot more growth out of a free market than you do a centrally controlled. Yeah, we may watch that. Like I said, we have about 2 hours in there every day, so we don't get the future out of it. All right, characteristics of a free market. Laissez-faire principle. Pretty much the goal of a free market is to keep the government out of the economy. It goes back to really, or kind of our foundations goes back, in the late 1700s, there was a guy named Adam Smith, known as the father of modern economics. And Smith wrote this book called The Wealth of Nations, which kind of outlined these free market ideals and principles. We were leaving a country with a monarchy, with a king, that we weren't real happy about. We didn't want the government in our business at that point. And so we pretty much sought out, how do we create an economic system where the individual people have control over the private resources? We don't need this big government to control the economy. You know, that's kind of what we were getting away from. And so that's where this whole free market capitalist idea came out from, is that the government can stay out of the economy, and it's actually going to control itself just fine. We'll look at free market, and then Smith had this big idea. If you take an econ class in college, you'll hear about the invisible hand theory. Now, Smith pretty much said that a free market economy has this invisible hand that controls it. That we don't need the government to control the economy, that consumers and producers will set prices and production and do all this stuff naturally, but the free market will control itself. That it's going to go up, it's going to go down, but naturally free markets will regulate itself, whereas we don't need the government to regulate it.
You said you wrote that book in the late 1700s? Or 17th century? I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm just curious. You said 1700s, right?
Someone Google it. Someone Google Wealth of Nations.
Okay.
was like
either-
17.
Okay, well,
I
I
would say
mean,
no one's
okay, well, that's kind of funny that the Gilded Age started like, what, 45 years after he wrote that book about laissez-faire, like little government involvement. Kind of ironic, I think, in my opinion.
1776.
1776. Okay.
It's 950 pages long.
Yeah, it's got a copy of it. I don't know if it's maybe at my house. I thought I brought it back
This is
here.
ironic that he said it was about laissez-faire, like little government involvement, so like,
Well, it's
like right after that.
more
kind of-
free market principles was the ideal.
Okay.
A lot of it was private control of resources. That instead of the government controlling the resources for production, that you and I will control the resources for production, and naturally, we're going to create a healthier system than the government trying to do it itself. So I mean, I guess it was prior or pre-laissez-faire technically, but
Okay.
the ideal was there. It just didn't have a stamp on it, I guess.
Okay.
2, individuals own the resources and answer the 3 economic questions. What are we going to make? How are we going to make it? Who's going to get it? 3 is a big one. The opportunity to make profit gives people incentive to produce quality items. If you think you can get rich doing something, you're probably going to do it. And if you've got access to the resources, why would you not? That's kind of the big idea behind this capitalist free market. That you have access to the resources, and if you can make a profit, that's what people are going to do. That people are going to operate in their own self-interest, and when they do that, that's best for a free market because they're going to buy and sell and trade. They're going to compete, and through this competition, it creates this really healthy economic system. Now, if people are not buying and selling and trading, recession, depression, those things, and that's bad for a free market because you don't have all this activity. 4, wide variety of goods available to consumers. And then 5, competition and self-interest work together to regulate the economy, which means it's going to keep prices down and the quality of goods up. Free markets are great for consumers because we're going to see, where's the example? Here it is. Consumers want smartphones, and only one company is making them. Well, what's going to happen? You're going to have new startup companies jump in and compete with whatever that one company is. I just saw an article the other day that there was a guy that defected from Tesla that is now producing more efficient electric cars. It's you want to know the name of it?
What's the name?
Electric startups.
I'll look it up in a minute. 'Cause I had to research. I didn't know what it was. That it was actually. What's that? What?
Rivian?
Nope.
Altera?
Nope.
Nikola?
Nope. I'll look it up in a minute. But anyways, if you've got one business that's just raking in the profits in a free market, you're going to have new startups to compete with that business because they want some of that profit too. Well, when you have competition, it's going to raise the quality of goods because if your competition has a really good product and you have a really crappy product, well, no one's going to buy yours. Everyone's going to buy the competition. It's going to keep prices down because if you have a really high price and your competitor has a low price, assuming equal quality of goods, well, why pay the higher price? And so free markets are going to drive prices down, they're going to drive quality up, and they're going to give you more choices for the goods that are out there because obviously you're going to have some kind of differentiation between you and your competition that sets you apart, something that makes you different. And so free markets are awesome for consumers. You get more products at cheaper prices and higher qualities because of this whole competition aspect. So for planters, there's only one company producing it. Obviously, it's regulated by the government. The government's not going to allow competition. So if you have no competition, why lower your prices? Why spend the extra resources to increase your quality? And why offer additional products? Because if there's no competition, they can take it or they can leave it. Now remember, this is theory. This is concept. This is not absolutely how it works in the real world with this big dictatorship creating cell phones. But in theory, it's going to lower the quality, it's going to raise the price, it's going to decrease the variation of products in the market when there's no competition. Now remember, these are two ends of the spectrum. There is no thing as a pure centrally planned, there is no thing as a pure free market. It's all a combination of these two aspects, so it's not as black and white as it seems in these slides either. So, everyone knows what a farmer's market is, I'm assuming, where the farmers grow the produce, they show up in this big field, they drop their tailgates, and then they sell whatever products they have grown. So, farmers show up, they set their prices in the morning. These customers come in, they make purchases that benefit themselves. Obviously, if you want to buy some potatoes, you're going to buy potatoes. If you want to buy some carrots, you're going to buy some carrots. Whatever makes you happy. If the apples are priced too high, well, no one's going to buy the apples. They're going to say, well, I want an apple, it's too expensive. I'm going to buy something over here that's cheaper, that's more in my price range. After a few hours, no apples selling, the farmer's going to look around and say, well, I'm going to have to lower my prices to become more competitive with these other fruits and vegetables that are being sold. Lower the prices, the customers like it, they buy more apples, customers are happy, the farmer's happy, it all ends well. At no point in that scenario did the government step in and say, hey, you better lower your apple prices right now. The government was not needed to regulate that market. Naturally, consumers and producers regulated that market on their own. Free market. There's Adam Smith, the invisible hand. Once again, no government control needed. Naturally, producers and consumers will regulate this market on their own. It's going to get bad, it's going to get better. It all goes in cycles, but over time, the economy will work itself out. Go back to 2009. Y'all may or may not remember any of this, but the Great Recession. Pretty much, too many people were getting housing loans that couldn't sustain them.
I thought it was Bush's presidency, like the end of Bush's presidency, not Obama's. I thought it was like 2007.
It started then. It just got real bad in 2009. That's when all this. Pretty much, it talks about the bubble bursting, and what happened is people were getting these loans that they couldn't afford, and so then everyone pretty much debunked on their mortgages, couldn't pay their housing payments, went into debt, everything was getting repossessed. The big lenders weren't getting their money, mainly Freddie Mae and Freddie Mac. And this was with a lot of ones. It affected the car industry, it affected so many different things, and so all of these big businesses are in jeopardy of going under. Ford's about to go under, GM's about to go under, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are in trouble, which are government institutions for the most part. And so the government's like, all right, what do we do? Do we just let these companies fail? And if we do, new companies will start. And that's the free market idea. There's a lot of economists out there are just hard set free market guys, and they're like, let Ford go under. Let Ford fail, a new company will start up to take its place. It's going to take some time. Or does the government give them a bailout to save these existing companies and hopefully shorten the amount of time that we are in this downturn and get the economy back on its feet quicker? And ultimately, we gave bailouts, got these companies back on their feet, everything got better over time. And this kind of gets into the macro thing too. In macro, you talk a lot about Keynesian economics and whether the government should spend money to manipulate the economy. Stimulus checks.
Do you not know if that's micro?
What?
Like Reaganomics versus Keynesian?
Yeah, we don't touch it. It's all macro. Yeah, they say that macro. Because it's whole economy stuff. It doesn't just affect one market. You don't give stimulus checks right now are a macro thing. That the government's handing out stimulus checks in hopes that people go out there and spend money, which is going to speed up the economy. And hopefully it doesn't tank. That's what the government's doing right now with the stimulus checks. It's trying to get people spending money right now. Because if no one's spending money, then businesses are going to fail. If businesses fail, unemployment goes up, and inflation is going to go up, and it gets worse. And so the whole Keynesian thing, the government's trying to spend money right now to hopefully shorten what can be the detrimental effects of COVID. Of course, there's free market guys out there that are like, don't do it, don't do stimulus, let them fail, let people claim unemployment. It's going to take longer to improve, but it's a free market. New people will start companies. You get the idea. So, invisible hand. We get that. No government.
So is that like the main argument between the two? Is that versus helping directly helping the people versus helping the companies, big companies, and then therefore that'll end up helping the people? Between those two?
Between bailouts and stimulus?
Between Reaganomics and I'm not forgetting the name of it. Yeah. Is that the main argument between the two? Directly helping the people to the middle class to stimulate the economy versus
They kind of get caught up in government spending and that. Why spend money when the market will take care of itself on its own? I don't know. We've got time. There's lots of videos to share. There's this fairly well done rap battle with John Maynard Keynes talking about boom or bust. Has anyone ever seen that? Probably not. It's really goofy, but it's kind of catchy. We'll watch it too. So we got way more time we need to look at it. But mixed economies. This is everybody. This is every economy in the world. So you've got some kind of combination of free market and demand style economies. Of course, the United States is about as much of a free market as you can get. Honestly, our government stays more out of our economy than any other country in the world. And then you've got North Korea is probably the leading command style economy right now. Former Soviet Union, China used to be heavily controlled, not so much anymore, but Cuba, not so much anymore. You get the idea. That slowly these heavily command economies are kind of moving back into the middle because they realize free market can provide a lot of good things, and a lot of times your citizens are happier if you give them a little bit more choice. So, but like I said, none of this really comes up on the test. They just want you to know what is not a free market. Or they put a question on there before. It's like, which one of these is a principle of a free market economy or something like that? But they're not going to outright ask you a question about communism or socialism. But they never have, because it's not within the microscope. But you get the point. All right, so circular flow model. This used to be, and I don't know if I believe it, some teachers are saying they've completely taken it out of the test because of the CED doesn't mention it anymore. But I don't know that I really believe that because it's always been in there. And I'll give you an idea of how they ask the questions. But basically, you got this big circular flow model here. Let me back it up, start there. So in a free market, you've got two separate markets. You've got a product market, which is finished products, and then you have a resource market, which is sometimes called the factor market. When we get to Unit 5, which is factor markets, we talked about the labor market more than anything. What is the supply and demand for labor that we need? But there's a lot of interchangeable terms in this class too. That's something you'll have to get used to, is that College Board will use 10 different terms all talking about the same thing. And it's really annoying, but that's just how they do it. So resource market is the same thing as the factor market, which is the same thing as the labor market. Product market is usually always the product market or the finished goods market, but they pretty much still do product market. You got two sides. You got businesses, you got individuals. And what we're looking at in blue is the flow of goods and services and resources. Green is the flow of money. So the way this works is we'll start over here with you, the individual. Well, you, the individual, demands the goods and services from the businesses. And so you are going to demand products in the product market. Businesses are going to supply products to the product market when you buy them. So when you go to Walmart, businesses supply the goods and services, individuals demand, you can't really see it down here, demand the goods and services. When you go to work, you supply your labor to the resource market because you are offering your job, your labor, your human capital, your skill sets. Businesses demand labor from the resource market. And so they, in turn, they give you a paycheck or a wage is what they give you. But it's this big circular thing. The individuals supply the labor to the resource market, which businesses demand. Businesses supply the goods and services, which individuals demand. That's how they've phrased questions in the past. They'll say, who supplies in the product market? Well, businesses supply in the product market. Who supplies in the resource market? Well, individuals supply their labor to the resource market. And so it's this big round and round thing. Green is money, because money is just going to go back and forth between individuals and businesses. Businesses have a cost, which they pay a wage to individuals, which is in the form of income. Individuals spend money, which turns into revenue for the businesses. Businesses a lot of times are called firms in micro. So businesses and firms is another interchangeable term. We do have the government in the middle. Government can supply and demand in both markets. And then we get way into taxes and subsidies and transfer payments and public goods. And those are all things we'll get to eventually. But in a general sense, the government's going to collect money in the form of taxes. And when they give money to businesses, it's in the form of a subsidy. The government is subsidizing the COVID vaccine, or has been for a year. That's when the government is giving money to increase production. Transfer payment is when the government gives a stimulus check. So when money goes from the government to individuals, it's a transfer payment. When money goes from the government to businesses, it's a subsidy. The government's going to collect taxes from everybody. And then public goods is pretty much things they provide for free. Military protection, local government provides street lights, anything. We won't get into public goods, but it's things that are provided for free because you can't really charge for them. But just know the government's kind of in there in the middle, doing all these different things. But they collect taxes, and we'll graph taxes. We'll graph subsidies a little bit once we get way towards the end. We'll talk about how that messes with markets. But we definitely start to graph taxes here pretty soon, next couple of years. But anyways, this is what's referred to as a circular float model. It doesn't really outright show up on the test. It's just kind of a teaching tool that we all use just to show, hey, it's this big cyclical thing that goes round and round in these free markets. Anything private is the individual citizens. Private doesn't have government involvement. Public does have government involvement. Public schools are government funded. Private schools are not. So private doesn't deal with the government. Public does. Public library, public transportation, things that have these government funding or government involvement. Private property, that belongs to you, not the government. Factor payments, like I said, that's when the government pays for these resources, or when a business gives you a paycheck, that's a factor payment because they're paying for you supplying your labor. Transfer payment is when the government gives money to the individuals, welfare, social security, stimulus checks, and then subsidies when the government gives money to businesses to increase production. COVID research, COVID vaccines. About that, it's like I said, it's nothing really. If it comes up, it's usually in that form right there. Who supplies in this market or who demands in this market? But if you understand the relationship that businesses are going to supply products and demand labor, individuals are going to supply labor and demand products, that's the big picture idea that you need. Questions? That's everything for 1.2.